Hello everyone, welcome to another Ask Ethys, the show where you ask Ethys, and if your questions aren't completely incoherent, Ethys answers them. I've got Poe here, and you can hear Cersei stomping around in the background as she generally is, and we are going to get straight into it because once again it's been a month since I've done this because I'm slack and because I thought I might get a few more questions. Actually, no, we do have a fair few. And as always, the more questions you ask, the more often and the sooner I'll be doing these. Or so I keep saying. So first question, what are your thoughts on how the Aura basically had no lore added to the main story to explain their appearance? I mean, we know Ugiri lived in Doma, but that's not where the Aura are originally from. It seems like the story just ignored them. They magically popped up. Yeah, I found that really frustrating because I was speculating about the origins of the Aura back when they were first announced, and Yoshi P talked about it a little bit. I mean, he said, well, they're not really draconic, they're more sort of demonic in their sort of influence and their style. And then it didn't really go anywhere, did it? So, I don't know. I really don't know. I hope we will find out more about them. I don't have any new sort of ideas at the moment. I know some people have been suggesting that maybe they're actually part Void Scent, maybe they're Void Scent hybrids. So maybe we'll find out something about them with the Void Arc. I really don't know. I have no idea. Next question is about Dark Knight. I'd love to see a video about the Dark Knight storyline. It's not much like anything else in the game and gives an interesting insight into your character, although I was a bit confused by the specifics at the end. So yeah, I've definitely been planning on doing this. I've got my Dark Knight to 50 and I've done obviously all the quests to 50. And from what I've heard from most people, it's the 30 to 50 job quests that are the really sort of important and interesting ones. And the 50 to 60 are not so much. I can't say whether that's true or not. But I would like to get it to 60 just so I know the wider context before I make a video on that. As for my thoughts, I found it interesting how it's never really explicitly stated, at least in the 30 to 50 job quests, that the darkness is sort of calling on the power of the void. And it seems to me that it's actually something quite similar to the inner beast of the warrior lore. And I mean, it makes me think that monks and ninjas and various jobs, they have different ways of describing the ether that's sort of native and internal to the body. And this might be another way of sort of looking at and describing and giving form and substance to the same thing as the inner beast. So I don't know, it's something that's drifting around in my head at the moment, and I will make a dedicated video on it in the near future, so look forward to that. Next, I just bought Heaven's Ward last Saturday. Well, that would have been Saturday 5 weeks ago then. Sorry to keep you waiting. I haven't finished the story yet. Well, I assume that you will have finished the story yet, and maybe you will have answered your own question by now, but it's still an interesting one. So I just got a question. Oh, no bite, come on. Is there a real difference in Zodiark and a Primal? Are the Ascian not just creating a Primal in Zodiark's image? So they could create a Primal in Zodiark's image, or more, they could get, like develop some kind of void cult or something that wants to summon Zodiark in the image of a Primal. Zodiark is not a Primal. Zodiark, at least in my opinion, is one of two of the sort of god figures in the world of Final Fantasy XIV that is actually kind of real substantial. And is basically the flip side to Hydaelyn. You have Hydaelyn and Zodiark, everything else is fiction, including the 12, I suspect, although they were based on real things where they were ancestors or old kind of powerful creatures. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend checking out the first video I did on the metaphysics of Hydaelyn, because I talk about this sort of Hydaelyn Zodiark dichotomy. And that's a pretty old video actually, so I think I'll put an annotation sort of here-ish for that. And yeah, please check that out, and hopefully that will make things a little bit more clear for you. Or alternatively, a lot less clear, because a lot of what I do seems to kind of complicate things more than it does clarify. Anyway, next question. Quick question. Which playable race has the most interesting history/lore in your opinion? Well, this is going to be pretty biased, but I think definitely the Duskwhite, because they're sort of born out of conflict, out of one of the umbral eras. It's sort of said quite explicitly in the character creation description actually, that after the fall of Amdapor and the War of the Magi and the elementals flooding the world and basically banishing everyone from the Twelves Wood, the survivors of Amdapor were forced underground. They built Gelmora, and when they emerged, the Elezen that were part of that society, they were Duskwhite. So there was something about that experience that changed them. Whether it was just the amount of time underground, whether they sort of adapted and evolved in some way, it's not clear. But I think that's really interesting and really compelling. And they're also really interesting in the sort of contemporary world, because they're by far, at least I think, the most underrepresented race in terms of the NPCs. You don't see very many of them. They don't have their own sort of cultural hub anywhere that's sort of visitable. There's not many of them in Gridania. There's not many of them in Ishgard. The Gridanians are actually quite sort of discriminative towards them, which I think is interesting. The only other race which is sort of comparable is the Hellsguard. They're sort of indigenous to Ablathia Spine. I thought we would see them in Heaven's Ward, and we haven't. But they treat the volcanoes in Ablathia Spine as a sort of portal to the void, a sort of gate of hell. It's this sort of very, very Hellenic kind of feeling, and I think that's really interesting. I want to see that explored as well. But yeah, for the moment, I'd definitely say Duskwhite to me is the most interesting. All right, here's another question that I've seen in a few different forms, and I have answered in other places before, but it's an interesting question. Any thoughts on the Warrior of Light being a primal? Created in the memories of the Lost Warriors in 1.0, gains strength to defeat stronger and stronger enemies, more people believe in the Warrior of Light's abilities, blah, blah, blah. Sounds like a primal to me. This is a compelling thread, and if the devs wanted to, they could easily pull that one out of left field and decide that we're a primal. My thought is that we existed before we were thought to be or described as the Warrior of Light. No one thought that we were the Warrior of Light before Minfilia sort of suggested it at the beginning of Operation Archon, so shortly before the end of 2.0's main scenario. There wasn't really any sort of transformation or anything at that point. What had happened is that we had gathered all of the crystals of light of each elemental aspect, and that seems to be the source of our power. And you might say, yeah, well, you know, that's where primals get their power from, right? They get their power from... That's right, Poe. Yes, you're very clever. That's where the primals get their power from. They get them from crystals that they sort of draw on and yada, yada, yada. But the difference is that without those crystals, the primal cannot stay intact. It cannot have a form. Whereas we had a form before the crystals, we have a form after the crystals. As that, you might say, yeah, well, you know, you've got Lady Iceheart, who takes the form of Shiva, but without the crystals, she's still Iceheart. I don't know. You can see, like it's a really difficult question. It's a really interesting question. I still think no, because it doesn't take a primal to draw on crystals. Anyone can draw on any kind of ether. You know, summoners and black mages and conjurers, they use crystals to sort of channel ether from the land. So the crystals are definitely an instrument of our power. Someone else has suggested in the comments here that that we might be something like a primal, but not literally a primal, but that, you know, people's belief in us is sort of giving us strength. Again, that's possible. I really don't know. This could go either way. I don't want to see us become a primal. I like the idea that our power is our own, particularly moving into Heaven's Ward. It's becoming less and less about us being gifted and more about us having our own sort of strengths and skills and taking responsibility for things. So I hope that answers your question. It probably doesn't, but there you go. That's what I got for that at the moment. So we've got a question here on the Warring Triad and basically whether I think that they can make an appearance as primals. I think that's basically where we're heading. They're described as elder primals and icons. I think that we're looking at a situation which is similar to Bahamut, is that they're actually alive and in a summoned state and just sort of held in stasis. Yes, that's right, Per, yes. So yeah, I think that's where we're heading. We're trying to prevent them from being released, but I think sooner or later we're probably going to have to fight them, and that will be as primals. Yes. Next one. Bearing in mind that I haven't played the summoner storyline, just what are the summons we have as a summoner? Reduced versions of the titular primals we fight and name our pets from. Same with the Carbuncle summoners. Arcanist Summer, seeing how Carbuncle is usually in Esper, Aeon Summon, Fal'Cie in other Final Fantasy games. So the Carbuncle and the Eggy are slightly different things in Final Fantasy XIV. So basically what the Arcanist does in terms of summoning a Carbuncle is while conjurers and thaumaturges, they'll draw ether from the sort of surrounding land in their own bodies, and they'll give it form as spells. That's sort of Magic 101. The Arcanist, they have these sort of algorithms in their books, and this, in the case of the Carbuncle, sort of acts. Think of it like a numinal stamp. Is that you take a collection of ether and you sort of stamp it. It's like a plate. Thanks, Cersei. It's like a Play-Doh stamp, right? You take a chunk of ether, you stamp it. There you go. You have a Carbuncle. And when the Carbuncle is defeated, or when you're sort of done with it, that ether just kind of dissipates back to the land. So the difference. You are such. So the difference is, with a primal, you have an essence, and that gives them a sort of a mind of their own, whereas carbuncles are very much sort of controlled by the user, and they're just a construct. Summoners are similar, but rather than looking at an algorithm in a book, you're basically studying the essence of the primal. So as we know, we've got concentrated prayer, which causes this sort of ethereal coalescence in the live stream and gives birth to the essence of a primal. So rather than using your algorithm as a stamp, you're using that as a stamp, and you're taking that and imposing it upon ether, and basically giving form to something that has this sort of verisimilitude and the attributes of that primal. So through the summoner storyline, the way it's basically explained is that once you've confronted and you've defeated those primals, that's sort of a sufficient study of the primal's essence to be able to subsequently summon an Eggy. With the Dreadworm, now I haven't done any of the post-50 summoner quest lines, so I'm not 100% sure about this, but my understanding of the whole Dreadworm thing is that on Cartano, on the eve of Cartano, I should say, a lot of Bahamut's essence was sort of scattered about the realm, and basically it's something that you can very easily tap into. His essence is kind of, I guess, kind of melded with a lot of the sort of natural ether to Hydaelyn, so you don't have to have directly confronted him or fought him to have access to that essence. Hey Ethys, bit of a random question, just wanted to hear your opinion. So with the Triple Triad game, past Final Fantasy characters exist as cards. Some NPCs use these cards, Tataru with Lightning and Furion, for example. I was wondering, why do these character cards exist in the world of Eorzea? Do the NPCs that use these cards have any knowledge of the characters on them? Ow, no bite. My headcanon is that the characters on the cards must exist in stories of some kind, but just wanted to hear your own opinion on this. So your headcanon is pretty spot on. If I have a look, hang on. I'm thinking of the card of Cain. I'll pull that up. Not the card of Cain, rather the Cain minion, I should say. But it sort of ties into the same thing. So the description for the Cain minion says, the tale of Cain, the dragoon who abandoned his duty for honor, is well known amongst Ishgardian children. So in this case, we've got Cain being transposed as a sort of old Eorzean legend. And I would say that it makes sense for the other characters to be sort of superimposed onto the Final Fantasy XIV universe in that way, is that, yeah, they are probably these sort of old legends that don't necessarily have anything to do literally with their characters from the previous Final Fantasy games, but sort of follows a common theme. So Shototo is a little bit like that as well, and I think we might assume that the characters that we see on various cards are something similar, yeah. Next question. I think you mentioned this in a State of the Realm episode with Happy and Sly, but do you think Shinryu will appear with Omega? And if so, do you think the storyline... How do you think the storyline will play out? Thank you, Poe, for those kisses. That was very nice. His first appearance of the Shinryu Omega feud was in Final Fantasy V, and the book that mentions them says Omega was created to battle Shinryu. Is it possible that Omega is older than the Allergans and they just discovered and reactivated him, similar to how the Garlians discovered and reactivated Ultima? I think that's a really interesting question. So the Allergans, although they created Ultima Weapon, his core is something there's just mentioned a couple of times by La Habrea. It's called the Heart of Sabik, and it's something that the Allergans discovered and that they used to power Ultima. So it's something that's actually much older than the Allergans and might date back to the time of the 12, might actually have been responsible for one of the former calamities. It might be something like the Heart of Lorcan in the Tamriel Elder Scrolls mythology, and might actually literally be the heart of a god. So the Allergans could have done something similar with Omega, I suppose. What we know of Omega for sure is that the Allergans mobilized him against Bahamut. Presumably he was the sort of updated version of Ultima, because they didn't think Ultima was quite up to the task of handling Bahamut. My suspicion is that Shinryu is probably the one that put it in the ground. So we know that it's buried beneath the Cardano Flats. My feeling is that after Bahamut was trapped, Shinryu probably defeated Omega Weapon, and that's going to be the basis of the Omega Ultima feud that we see in Final Fantasy XIV, rather than something older that's sort of predates the Allergans. So that's how I think it's going to pan out. But like you, I'm really interested to see what happens. I'm really interested to see how Ilberd gets his hands on Omega, because I think that's where Ilberd's going. I mean, come on, Ilberd's already said that he'll stop at nothing to save Alamigo, and he's ready to stab his old comrades in the back to do it. Ilberd's going after Omega. Okay, next question is a long one, but a quite interesting one. So, when Louisoix attempted to summon the 12 in the Battle of Cartano, was he essentially attempting to summon primals rather than the actual gods to save the realm? Are the 12 a collection of primals, or are they a collective of single mind where the primal is 12 beings envisioned by the people? Were the 12 once early umbral astral era heroes, or are they just visions of religion deities of the 5 races? While most of this may be speculation, would you like one day to converse with or fight against the 12? I'll answer that first. So my thinking is that when Louisoix attempted to summon the 12, he was asking for people to pray, and he was causing that, ethereal coalescence, which sort of makes an essence out of life stream ether, and sort of giving an essence form to the 12, whether that's each of the 12 or the concept of the 12 in one essence. I don't know. I'm not really sure whether it's important. But what Louisoix was about, as far as I understand, is that rather than drawing on that essence to create a sort of physical summon form, he basically used it to power a spell. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense, because it doesn't entirely make sense to me. But that's how I sort of think about it anyway. As for what the 12 originally were, well, we know that the time before the first Umbral era was called, or at least we call it now the time of the 12. So I've got the suspicion that the 12 are basically the ancestors of the Elezen race, or like you say, they're old heroes or leaders that were sort of revered through those first few ages, and sort of gain this legendary status. The same way that I've sort of talked about Garuda having maybe been the original liberator of the Ixal and became revered and thought of as a god in that way. And if you think back to the sort of pinnacle of 2.0, Gaius talks about the 12 in the same way that he talks about the Primals. He describes them as icons. He says that they could be summoned if you only had enough crystals, because the prayers are already all there. And I agree with him. I don't think he would have any reason to sort of lie to us about that. I think most of what Gaius says is pretty spot on. Just the methods that he goes about it are kind of fucked up. Okay, so the second part of your question, moving on from that, while we know Hydaelyn, the mother crystal, is the central being, the planet/world, can she be compared to an icon, much like the warring Triad, or is the mother crystal being far beyond that of anything else we've seen? Being that she couldn't protect us against a second Ultima, it's possible she's extremely weak. With our link now re-established, I wonder if we can give her some much needed essence. Okay, so no, Hydaelyn is not an icon. Given that people worship Hydaelyn, then if they sort of fucked up, then they could sort of summon her as an icon. But no, she's something quite different. Hydaelyn to me is literally the planet. She's a crystallization of ether in space, and all of the world's ether is Hydaelyn's ether. And every time you summon a primal, you're taking ether away from her and you're trapping it in this other sort of unnatural thing. That's the problem with the primals. That's why we talk about the primals as sort of draining the planet. So the reason why Hydaelyn was weak at the end of 2.0 was because we had a bunch of primals that were being summoned and floating around. The summoning of Ultima itself was drawing a great deal of ether away from her that was going to take a little bit of time to be returned to her. And you also had the body of Bahamut in the ground, which had been absorbing ether for 5,000 years. And that was greatly weakening her for some time. No bite. You're being very naughty. You're being very naughty because I'm not giving you attention. Okay? You be a good boy now. Again, I'd refer you back to my first metaphysics video if you haven't seen that already. Annotation here again. Check that out. Hopefully that will answer your questions. All right, next question. This is another interesting one, and I don't think that anyone has really has really talked about this anywhere yet. So what's the deal with the Papistry, I should say, in Azys Lla? It's very conspicuous, and yes, it is very conspicuous. And actually, I've got it here. So let's switch over to that now and have a look at the Papistry. Oh, that's a mindfuck right there. All right, and there's Wind Up Cane. All right, Papistry. Here it is. Papistry in Azys Lla. Now, a papus, to give you a sort of definition, is when a seed or a fruit or a flower has these sort of bristles or hairs, and it basically functions as a parachute. So it allows the seeds to be carried by the winds and disseminate across the land. So the Papistry, to me, it might imply that this is something that sort of disseminates ether or something, or is a result of something being spread. Maybe it's like a seed of the original Yggdrasil or something. I don't know. I think it's more likely that this is going to be referencing to old Allegan mythology rather than a sort of literal understanding, as far as I would take it. This is definitely going to be something important in the future, and I don't know, there's a lot in this term papus, but it's also very, very vague. I don't know. I haven't really thought about this, so I might end up making a video on this. I might end up looking into this and seeing if I can't tease it out a little bit. But for the time being, your guess is as good as mine. Next question is about the ether. So is ether like matter/energy in that it cannot be created nor destroyed? The ethereal realm / live stream talk seems to make a big deal about the cycle of ether between the mortal realm and the ethereal realm, and it seems like ether is conserved in the transition. If so, how does that reconcile with the way Ascians, which essentially exist as discrete quanta of ether, can be destroyed using the Blade of Light? Are we reducing the total quantity of ether that exists in the universe by destroying Ascians? That's a great question. So firstly, you're spot on. So ether is like the atomism of both matter and energy. It's this sort of state from which you can pull and produce, like I say, matter or energy. And the ethereal realm, like you say, is the source of ether in that sort of ethereal state, and as it crystallizes, it becomes physical things. So think of Ascians in the way that we think of Primals, is that without their body, they have this essence that remains sort of intact by focus or concentration of will. So for the Primals, it's sort of prayer, sort of focusing on this ether that's sort of drifting in the live stream and keeping it in one sort of neat clump. The Ascians, as far as I understand, they're basically the same. They have this essence which stays together but doesn't need any sort of prayer or concentration of will. It just stays together through, I think anyway, and I suspect, a function of the echo. I think that that's basically what the echo is and what it does for them. And it's the same reason why we were able to travel forward through the live stream when Louis Soir cast us into the future at the Battle of Cartano. So what we're doing when we destroy an Ascian is basically what happens when you destroy all of the people praying for a primal, is you're causing that essence to disintegrate. So no, we're not destroying ether, we're breaking up a sort of chunk of ether into its constituents and just sort of returning that, disseminating that across the live stream. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's not too rambling, that answers your question to some extent. Another good question here. With the reveal of the Void Ark, do you think in a later expansion we might get to go to the Void to explore it like an area as opposed to a battle area like World of Darkness? I think that would be awesome. I don't know whether it's going to happen or not. I mean, they definitely could. As Mr. Happy always likes to insist, and I sort of feel the same way, I'd like to explore the rest of Eorzea first before we start going to Garlemald or Mericidia or the New World or the Moon or the Void. That said, what I would really Poe, did you just chew off one of my... Poe just chewed off part of my zipper. Fucking birds. Yeah, so I'd like to see something like the Pandemonium Fortress in Diablo 2, where we sort of managed to create like a little bit of civilization on the edge of the void, and we sort of push into the void to, I guess, hunt the Askins on their own turf or something like that. I think that would be really cool concept for or part of a future expansion, but I don't think we'll see anything like that in a long time. Next question. Do you think we will make peace with the Garlians in the future? I'm thinking we will meet some sympathetic noble who we will help overthrow the Emperor, maybe somehow alive and disgraced Gaius or Nero. You should all know my opinion on Gaius by now. I think he is alive. I think that his sort of idea that was driving his invasion was that no one in Eorzea was strong enough to deal with the Primals and to sort of save the realm, and that he was going to have to do it by force and by oppression. And we basically proved him wrong, and he more or less conceded that after we defeated him before he presumably died, which I don't think he did, because no one saw a body, no one saw him disappearing. It was just an explosion and he was gone. Anyway, I'm not going to get in that argument right now. I think that I would like to see Gaius again, and I think that if we do, he'll be on our side and he will help us push back in some way. As for Nero, I think he definitely has aspirations for power and possibly to overthrow the Emperor. And I mean, it would be consistent. Well, to be fair, Gaius and Nero, they're both names of Roman emperors, so really either of them could become an emperor, and we could call it sort of dramatic foreshadowing in some way, but I think out of the two of them, the one that would really aspire for it would be Nero. As for making peace with the Garlian Empire itself, no, I don't think so. I think they're an important antagonist, at least for the foreseeable future. I think they're going to be instrumental in uniting man and dragon. The dragons are going to feel quite threatened by what they're finding in Azizlar in terms of neurolinking technology and stuff like that, and that is going to inspire more and more of the Dravanians to help us against them and against Nidhogg. Next question. You keep saying New World. I haven't heard anything about that while playing Final Fantasy XIV. Could you shed some light on that, Ethys, or anyone? So, the New World has been mentioned a couple of times, both in interviews and in-game. The most notable instance I can think of off the top of my head is in the Great Google Library, where we see one of the notes in there talks about how Melweb actually discovered the New World and had some dealings with indigenous tribes and various unspecified adventures. So we know that it exists. We know that Melweb is basically Christopher Columbus. And we also know that that is where the Mammal Jar are from. It was also mentioned in the second year anniversary, the 14-hour broadcast, the lore panel that Koji did, that the Pamamas are native, because there was a question raised, how come we've got Popotos rather than potatoes like Final Fantasy XI, but we've got bananas rather than Pamamas, which were in Final Fantasy XI, to which Koji's reply was that Pamamas exist in the New World. A lot of people are suggesting, as a result of that and as a result of the whole Mammal Jar thing, and the fact that so much of the Wanderer's Palace hard mode was literally lifted straight out of Final Fantasy XI, that the New World might literally be Vana'diel. I don't want to see that. I don't mind it being sort of implied and hinted at as being Vana'diel and as a sort of instrument of fan service or whatever, but if we actually end up going there at any point and it turns out to be Vana'diel, I'm going to be pretty disappointed, I gotta say. Alright, I'm going to do just a few more because you can probably hear that I'm already starting to lose my voice. God, I'm so bad at talking. Like, I don't know what it is. I think I just have like a really inefficient way of using my voice box because I wear it out so quickly. So was the cause of the mass amnesia ever explained? That's interesting. So we're talking about how no one remembers the Warriors of Light and everyone in the realm seems to have forgotten large parts of what happened at Cartano. Do we know how many people Louis Soir sent to the future? Is it supposed to be a big number or just a select few? I think it's supposed to be deliberately ambiguous. To my knowledge, there is only one other person we see besides ourselves who was sent forward in time. She was one of the no-name scions in the Waking Sands and was killed when the Garlians attacked. For legacy players, we know that the amnesia gets lifted and he is remembered at the end of ARR. But is that only for the player? It can be assumed that it gets lifted for all people. Louis Soir sent forward in time as well, assuming, of course, that there were more and not just one random scion. If you aren't a legacy player, does the amnesia ever get lifted, or does that just happen off screen? And lastly, what causes the amnesia to be finally cured? Okay, so firstly, like I say, it's deliberately ambiguous regarding how many people were sent forward. The implication was basically everyone who was at Cartano and had the Echo and was a Warrior of Light or something similar was cast forward in time. I'm pretty sure that it was the Echo, because I'm pretty sure that the Echo sort of mechanically is something like, you know, the soul of a primal or an Ascian, where you've got this ethereal coalescence and you can survive in the ethereal stream, whereas most living beings would not. As for it being lifted, so you're talking about how the Scions recognize the player as the Warrior of Light at the end of A Realm Reborn. So I'm pretty sure for legacy players, they do literally remember. So I think the implication for non-legacy players is either that you are one of the Warriors of Light and they just sort of decide that without ever explicitly remembering it, or basically that you are like an avatar of the Warriors of Light or something similar. They basically just decide that you're more or less the same thing. Not that you are literally one of the Warriors of Light from Cardano. What causes the amnesia to finally be cured? I don't think it is finally cured. I don't know. You'd have to ask a legacy player about that, because I don't know how they explain that. I've got a feeling that the science basically just come to the conclusion that you must be a Warrior of Light. Alright, I'm going to take just two more questions. Firstly, thoughts on Unukalhai, considering his name comes from the star that is the heart of the constellation Serpens. So Unukalhai is the sort of traditional old Greek name for Serpentarius. So the interesting thing about Serpentarius is that in Final Fantasy Tactics, we actually have various important characters who hold stones which are named for the 12 constellations of the Zodiac, of which Serpentarius is not actually one, but there's sort of this literature about it being sort of a proposed 13th Zodiac, or sort of being imposed upon the 12 from above somehow. Anyway, so there is a character in Final Fantasy Tactics that holds the stone of Serpentarius, and his name is, you guessed it, Elidibus. So take from that what you will, but I will not be at all surprised if Unukalhai and Elidibus are one and the same, and that Urianger is sort of leading us on, and that his association with Unukalhai is literally just his association with Elidibus. And that actually leads into the last question quite interestingly. So, I apologize if you addressed this before, I may have missed it. What is your thoughts, if any, from a lore perspective on Urianger's meeting with Elidibus? So far, the popular theory seems to be that he is trying to get Moonbreeder resurrected by otherworldly means due to lover's grief, as it were. I don't buy it, but I do think the Ascians are holding her soul over his head for some reason. Thoughts? I'm pretty sure it was Sly that first proposed that idea, that Urianger was sort of trying to save Moonbreeder in some way. My thinking is that if Moonbreeder is dead, if her soul is sort of collapsed and drifted back into the ethereal stream, that I don't think there's anything really the Ascians can do in terms of bringing her back. So it either means that she's not quite dead, but is being held together by Elidibus somehow and is sort of enthralled by him somehow. But the thing is, Urianger should know better, and Urianger should know that if he gets Moonbreeder back, it's probably going to be a Primal. It's probably not going to be Moonbreeder. So I really don't know what his angle is. I think that that's a compelling one in terms of the story, in terms of the character progression of Urianger. I think that's a really interesting one. I think that's the most likely one. I just don't know how they're going to explain it yet. Anyway, guys, I've been recording for about an hour now, so I am going to stop. I'm going to edit this. I'll have it uploaded probably tomorrow morning. Thanks so much for watching. As usual, leave a question below in the comments if you want to see it answered, and I'll have another look at them in a couple of weeks and see if we've got enough questions to do another video on. What I'm thinking of it, I don't know if I mentioned it at the beginning, but thank you very much to Natragora for the new little artwork I'm probably going to have in the corner here. That's awesome. His work is awesome. You should go check him out on Tumblr. I'll post a link to his Tumblr here. I'll post his Twitter as well, although his Twitter game is pretty atrocious, I think, so don't expect too much from his Twitter. And yeah, Nact, you're awesome. You keep doing you. And for the rest of you, take it easy, and I will see you in whatever the next video is. Bye!